everyone. Welcome to Briar Haus Writes. I'm Becky Parker, and today it is my honor to be able to have acclaimed poet and professor at East Tennessee State University with us today, Mr. Jesse Graves. Jesse, welcome to our program.
Well, thanks so much, Becky. I'm really glad to be here with you.
Jesse, you've been described as a poet deeply rooted in Appalachia. Can you tell us about that and what's the hardest topic you've ever covered and how did that impact you?
Well, my family history is in East Tennessee from all the way back to the 1780s. So I have some deep roots here in East Tennessee. I grew up in Union County. It's the next county north of Knox County, about 40 miles from Knoxville, but way out in the country. It's 40 miles, but it takes over an hour to get from where I grew up to Knoxville, if that tells you anything about the windy country roads. So that's a little bit of my home place, and that place has continued to just be a muse for me. I go back, my mother still lives there, and all of my ancestors are buried there, and so it's pretty bedrock Appalachia. Although that was not a term I really knew as a child. We just thought of ourselves as country people, and I was always intrigued by the city. I always loved going to town. I always loved going to Knoxville. I've written about this a little bit. I don't have a lot of funny poems or humorous poems, really. It just doesn't seem to be my style. But I have a couple about my childhood, about going to town and sort of seeing town for the first time, which was always such a grand and kind of overwhelming experience. So yeah, so my ancestors are German and came down through Pennsylvania, Western North Carolina, over into East Tennessee. Um, so Appalachia's been a part of my ancestry since first arriving in the United States.
So, what topics are the hardest ones that you do cover when you write?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of there's a lot of hardship in Appalachia, and I grew up surrounded by kind of rural poverty that I don't think a lot of America ever has seen or doesn't really know much about. It's never really depicted very much in the news or in popular culture. So I feel like there are some hardships associated with that for sure. There are some stereotypes that are kind of hard to work around when you're writing about Appalachia. I have had a hard time writing about, actually, hard subject that I haven't yet been able to write about is sort of natural disaster, like Hurricane Helene last year. We're coming up on the first anniversary of that, and I really have not been able to get my feelings and experiences much into print about that. So there are still things that I haven't quite, even though I've been writing poems for a long time, and trying to not um, overlook the difficulties. I've always wanted to give a kind of um, as true a representation of the place and the people in the place where I'm from as I can, and not all that's picturesque and not all that's beautiful. A lot of it is difficult, and a lot of it involves a lot of struggle. And so the title of my first book is Tennessee Landscape with Blighted Pine. So I wanted to get that sense really from the very beginning of the landscape and the muse that the landscape has been for me, the inspiration that it's been for me, but also, it's a place where a blight can happen. It's a place where and that's a literal blight in the trees, and there are also some figurative ones that have come through our part of the world.
Well, Jesse, what led to your writing journey? How did you become an author and a poet writer?
Yeah, this is I have thought about this, and it would be hard to say in any particular point. I feel like when I was a, when I was a little kid, I was always playing these kinds of narrative games. I was always, my games, even with my little Hot Wheel cars, were stories that I was building out. And I did. I probably was trying to write a few of those down even when I was a child. My I'm first generation college students. My parents did not have much opportunity for education the way that I've had, and Nevertheless, though, my mom was a big reader, and so I remember books in our house. And even though I truly, honestly, wasn't a big reader as a kid, there were a few things I liked. I loved Jack London. I loved anything with a boy and a knife and a wolf, something like that. I love that kind of story. Maybe a spaceship because I did grow up in the Star Wars era, so I did. So that there's that aspect as well of just the expanse of the imagination. But I was probably in college before I was really trying to write stories, poems, essays about my own experience. In high school, I played music a lot. I come from a musical family, although I did not really get that talent, unfortunately, the bare minimum of that talent. And so I thought I was writing songs maybe in the beginning, and I just didn't have the, I don't know, I couldn't sing and I couldn't sing and play at the same time. I don't know. I just didn't have the right skill set for that.
Right?
But music was probably the gateway. My mother and especially my older brother, my older sister, my uncles who were around when I was growing up. I had a couple of uncles who off and on lived at our house, and they were just so important to me. And um, so they were, one of them loved outlaw country music, Waylon Jennings and Willie Nelson, and the other one loved heavy metal, Black Sabbath and Kiss and Led Zeppelin. So I got this kind of
Variety.
immersion, yeah, into music. And my mom loved bluegrass and like Ralph Stanley and Bill Monroe. So I did hear a lot of different kinds of music, both played on the radio and also played at family get-togethers, just amongst the relatives.
So when you went to college for the first time, were you actually majoring in, any kind of literature, fine arts? What were you majoring in?
Undecided was my first major.
Ah,
Undeclared. I really didn't know. I went although I've had so many like strokes of luck. I don't know what else you call them, just these blessings, these good fortunes that have come to me um, with teachers. And I was not a great student. I never really knew how to be a student other than I was curious and interested and probably had like an aptitude for um, I don't know, language. And even in the early days until it became algebra, I had a real aptitude for math. And so I did well in school, even though I wasn't maybe that disciplined or didn't really know quite what I was there to do. So by the time I got to college, I went to Lincoln Memorial University, which is a beautiful little campus in Harrogate, Tennessee, kind of right on the Tennessee-Kentucky border. I had no clue, but at the time it has this great literary history of writers, Jesse Stewart and James Still and Don West and George Scarborough, Emma Bell Miles. So many important Appalachian writers have connections to LMU. And I sort of learned that when I got there. But it was also just the closest school. This is the school I could drive to, and I had a wonderful professor. I had several wonderful professors there, but one who passed away recently, named David Worley, who just was randomly assigned. He's an English professor, but he's randomly assigned to be my advisor. And I
hmm.
came in for my advising appointment, which I never didn't really know what to do for that. And he was saying, well, what do you like? And I said, well, I like psychology and I like history. And he was looking at my test scores, looking at my grades. And um, he said, well, you kind of seem like an English major to me. He said, why don't you sign up for my honors English seminar next semester? He said, your scores, I had a really weird ACT score that was like way low in one area, way high. And so
Probably
he
really
said,
low in math and really high in the other.
yeah, yeah. And so he encouraged me to take that honors class, even though I didn't know there was such a thing, and I loved it, and I wrote some pieces for that um, that he really he praised and he was encouraging about, and so but even before that, even back to high school, I had a few really great teachers, and went to a very sort of poor country school, but the teachers were fantastic. And um, Kenneth Venable, we all called him KV, and he was my English and history teacher, and um, in 11th and 12th grade, and I just got a lot of encouragement. I think back on all these writers and teachers who've helped me along the way, and kind of like every time I needed a little direction, I would find someone who helped me with that. And those were the two of the earliest, but I mean the list just goes it goes right on up through just a few years ago, really.
And imagine the impact that you're going to have as a professor on all these kids that in, 100 years from now will go, golly, I remember when I had, Mr. Jesse Graves. Jesse,
Well, I
can
hope I can pass a little bit of it on down the line.
well, I think through Zoom and all kinds of ways, I think you'll be able to because the, videos will go on forever. Jesse, will you read some of your work for us?
Oh yeah,
Love to
absolutely.
hear.
I picked out a couple that I thought might just be kind of I always want to read new poems in a situation like this, but I feel like I ought to read one or two that are actually kind of foundational poems, poems in which I felt like maybe I got some bit of my early experience or some bit of what I was trying to say in poetry into those poems. So I thought I would start with the first poem in Basin Ghosts. This is my second book. It came out in 2014, so it's been around a little while now. Um, and I don't often, read these poems at readings or have a chance to revisit them very often. So I'm happy to get to do that now. I'll read the first poem called The Invitations. Come now out of those shadows, child, said a red oak from the forest edge. Step from behind that porch banister. You have nothing but friends in the woods. So my mind abandoned human homes. It went to live with the undergrowth, the ground squirrels, skittish coyotes, feeding on rabbits and wild berries. The stream said, our bodies are the same. Where you curve, I curve to gather you. The racer said, I will not outpace, I will not strike a blow against you. When snow fell, my mind shivered, burrowed into the flanks of cattle, straddling scattered bales of timothy and rye. My thoughts lived in the stalls of old barns. The mockingbird sang, your dream, poor child, weighs no more than a fluted feather. You will see the bright top sides of clouds. The west wind will deliver us home.
Beautiful.
Thank you. I didn't intentionally, try to write my poem about the imagination, but I feel like that was sort of that was my childhood in a little holler surrounded by woodlands, no neighbors in sight. And I was the youngest child of three. My brother was 14 years older than me, and my sister is 11 years older than me.
Wow.
So I really was, in some ways, um,
An
a
only child.
child alone. Although I had tons of family around, and a lot of my games were these kind of solitary, playing in the woods or looking up into the woods or imagining. I don't know. Did the red oak speak to me as a child? Who
It
can
might
say?
have, who can say?
Who can say?
If a tree falls in the forest,
That's right. That's right. Also, if it says something, who knows?
that's right. What stays in the forest, it's heard in the forest stays in that forest. So.
Also, a kind of earlier one from my first book that I mentioned earlier, Tennessee Landscape with Blighted Pine. This is a 10th anniversary edition, which my publisher was nice enough to re-release in also a bigger font, which is helpful for the reading glasses, but with also some new poems in it. So it has a dozen new poems. This is the original version, which you can tell it's kind of worn. I've taken it with me a lot of places, and
Yeah, it looks
but
like it's
you can
got some
also
plastic on it.
this one's a lot bigger. So
I like it.
yeah, my aging eyes much appreciate having this bigger print in the other volume. Um, but I thought I would read since I read a childhood poem. I thought I would read a family poem, a sort of family history connection to my place, which is Sharps Chapel, Tennessee, and um, one that looks back at at our annual family get together. One of my friends said, if your family get together happens at your cemetery, you're probably Appalachian. You're probably that's pretty Gothic Appalachia right there. So I will read this poem called Johnson's Ground. We sit under the awning, watching them descend in unison, a flock of 30 or more, down through the heavy rain we weren't supposed to get, pecking where grass is thin for what the moisture turns up. They look like the sound of the word grackle. These scavengers with wings muted black as painted iron rails, as wet tar, their empty beaks flashing a bright citrus smear. Memorial Day weekend, and the weather drives us for cover, beating down plastic flowers and darkening family gravestones. Each year we arrive, distant relations, to admire new babies and find out who has changed jobs or gotten married. I come to see who's left, to sit in the shaded chairs where my grandmother sat with her oldest sister Minnie for the last time. Neither of them able to name the other, but both staring as if into a clouded mirror. In the memory of their faces, I see pillars of stone, pillars of stippled salt, where the hammer of time drives the chisel of living. The opaque blue of their eyes, each pair reflecting the other, sky blue buttons threaded through a dark blue dress. Homecoming at the cemetery. They never let us go. Even the ones laid under before our births continue to make their claims, to draw interest on their spent lives. My grandfather waits here, Houston buried in Johnson ground. Such is the appointment he made with them. He was dead 2 years before I was born, but of whom do I remind the old people? Whose picture did I stare into above the living room fireplace? My great uncle Gene tells my father and me about the base he served in Korea, how bombs sounded hitting the village. While 100 feet away is my cousin Gary, killed in Vietnam, telling his story into our other ears, into the soles of our shoes. The foraging birds drag worms out of the ground. We pulled dark meat from the bones of chicken thighs and split boiled potatoes with plastic forks. Damp air hums in our lungs, and the old people begin covering dishes. Rain always seeps in, even under shelter. I offer my hands one more time to the company who packs their leftovers and drives away, and to the company who stays behind, under the tall grass, left in the restless turning of what we remember of them. Thank you.
We hear so many, especially um, as you age and if you come from a big family like I did, and then you try to go back home and there's no one left. And
Yeah,
so I
yeah.
love your poems because it really does,
Thank you.
make you want
Yeah,
that family reunion, even if it means they're in another dimension and you're still
yes.
here.
Yeah, yeah. There's more under more under the ground than above the ground at this point in my family, and our population there to have the picnic is smaller, and our population that we've come to visit is larger, and that seems to be story of s story of big families like ours.
I agree. As a writer, we often face critique, and sometimes it's so challenging to be able to show that vulnerability. Tell me about if that's ever happened to you, where you may have had a terrific compliment which is, sends you to, to the moon, but then another one which may have sent you to the depths of despair.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh yeah.
unless, so tell us how, what advice would you give to a writer who perhaps is not at the soaring plane yet, but more in the despair part?
Well, that's where a lot of us are most of the time. I think we're like, how do we ever do this? How do we ever? It's a new world every day. Writing poems, it feels like you're every new poem presents you with this whole new set of puzzles and challenges and little problems to solve. And I love that. But, at times I'm stumped now, just as I was, 25, 30 years ago, at this very beginning thinking about poetry. And well, like I said earlier, I've had some wonderful teachers and I've gotten some invaluable praise. I've gotten some encouragement at times, as I said, when I needed it. My first poetry teacher at the University of Tennessee is the wonderful Connie Jordan Green, who I know has been on your program before. And I love Connie. I'm still in touch with her as often as I can be. And she gave me a lot of encouragement in my early poetry writing. I had her for two classes as an undergraduate at Tennessee, which is my good fortune. And she said at one point, I came to her office to talk about my portfolio for this semester, and Connie's the one who introduced me to Wendell Berry's poetry and to Robert Morgan's poetry, and who later was a major professor and influence and still a good friend to me. I'll see him next week when he's in North Carolina, and like these connections have sort of I've been able to carry them with me, and Connie said at one point, she said, you could stick with this. You could keep doing this. She said, "There's nothing to keep you from being the next Galway Kinnell," who was my favorite poet at that time. He had just visited the University of Tennessee, and I saw his poetry reading, and I thought, "This is the coolest person I've ever seen in real life." Like he was just uh, amazing. He was probably 70 years old. He was had his little New England sweater on, and recited his poems at the Laurel Theater in Knoxville. It was really something, and I have kind of never forgotten that moment. And it was after that that Connie said, you can stick with this, and you keep trying, keep working at it, and there's no reason you can't do this for your whole life. And I didn't really even quite know what that would entail, what that would mean, but I sure needed to hear it just then because it gave me the thought that maybe I could keep this love of words, this love of the music of language, and the what Seamus Heaney calls the music of what happens,
Mm.
which I've always thought was like the encapsulation of poetry for me. There's no reason that a poet can't keep getting better and better, really. I mean, we sort of think of the John Keatses and the Sylvia Plaths, who were these bright stars, in their youth, Hart Crane, and I love those poets. But I mean, there's no reason that you can't keep learning and growing and developing your voice as get on into your years. And
But when you think about Sylvia Plath, though, she was a tremendous poet, but she had such terrible mental illness.
oh yeah,
So,
yep, yep.
as a writer, how do you keep your sanity? How do you keep your peace so that you can move forward and get past those challenges?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, certainly the world around us can seem like it's lost its sanity a lot of the time. And how does a person stay grounded and balanced? And I mean, writing poetry certainly helps me do that. Reading. I mean, reading helps me do that too. And I should have probably mentioned reading a lot earlier in this conversation because it really has given me, a world to live in. Not that you have to separate out from the world around you. But I find a lot of joy in the world and a lot of uh, I mentioned earlier that I don't really write funny poems, but I do find a lot of things in my life funny.
Mhm.
Um, I think being able to keep a bit of levity and a bit of balance and a bit of hopefulness. I mean, this is one of the ways you resist despair about your writing. That's I mean, writing can be very solitary, and it can be you can work a long time on something that might not actually achieve what you want it to achieve. The poem, the story, the novel. Yeah, I mean, you might devote years to something that doesn't quite come together in the way that you hope that it will. And how do you not despair about that? You have to love the process, I think. You have to love the writing and the reading and the conversations that writing allows you to have. And those are much more available to people now than they ever were, as your program demonstrates, and as writers groups. And one of the things that I have loved being able to do at ETSU is bring writers to our campus who can interact with not just our students, but our whole community. I think it enlarges the experience for the students, and it brings people together who might not otherwise have a room to come together in.
Well, and it
So
seems like that,
hopefulness.
for those of you who are not familiar, when we say ETSU, we're talking about East Tennessee State University. And can you tell us a little bit about how you became poet in residence there? That's quite an honor.
Well, yeah, it is truly, and I feel that way. Being a kid from rural, poor East Tennessee, it means so much to me to teach at East Tennessee State University. I would have loved teaching anywhere in the world that I would have found students and found a teaching job. I would have loved it. I taught for a year at the University of New Orleans. Some of my most fun and rewarding teaching experiences were in that year. I taught after my master's degree. I taught for 2 years at Cornell University, so upstate New York. I had one student from the South the whole time I taught probably 12 or 15 classes there over the course of the time I was there. And I certainly in a way could feel out of my element. I taught at the University of Tennessee, my alma mater, as a graduate student and as a 1 year postdoctoral fellow. But the most special teaching that I've done has been at East Tennessee State. It's as a first generation college student, as an East Tennessee kid from East Tennessee, growing up without a lot of examples of never met a college professor until I went to college. Like my
Mhm.
first college class was the meeting of my first college professor. It was nowhere in my imagination or in my dreams to be one someday when I was a kid. It just didn't seem
How
like
could you?
how could I? Yeah, I had no frame of reference for it. So
Kind of like when an astronaut comes to your class.
that's right. That's why it's so important for astronauts and everybody else. Electricians and doctors and teachers and nurses, everybody to come to classes and for students to get to see these other um, occupations and these other ways of making your way through the world. So when an opportunity came along at East Tennessee State, um, I that 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 was special for me because a lot of my students here through the years have had similar backgrounds to mine, similar experiences to mine, and a lot haven't. And I don't have any. I don't have any. Like I said, I would love to teach. I've loved teaching everywhere, but it's special here. And being the poet in residence allows me to do a few things that just my job as a professor does not necessarily like. I get one of my jobs, one of the really um, fun and challenging and time consuming parts of my job is I direct the Bert C. Bach Written Word Initiative, and that is our program for bringing in literary events, guest writers. Often we do programs just for our students, but mostly our programs are open to the public. They're free. They're open to the public. We're able to bring writers to campus through some incredible generosity of Dr. Bert C. Bach, who was the provost and vice president. He was the interim president of ETSU for a little while, and just really hugely consequential leader for the community. And he passed away a couple of years ago, but about 10 years ago, he called me in and said, I've been thinking that a lot of our focus, as it should be, is on our medical school, it's on our nursing program, it's on our um, STEM programs. He said, I worry a little bit that we aren't paying enough attention to the written word.
Mm.
And Dr. Bach was an old English professor before becoming provost and vice president. So his heart was really with the arts. And so he said, what if we had some resources? What if we had some funds? And he, gave out a number that, we hadn't had any funds before. And he gave out a number that is not exorbitant, but that to me was like jaw
Mm.
dropping because we went from zero to that amount
Wow.
in 1 minute. And it was like, wow, what could we do with that? And so that was his challenge to me. He's like, if you're going to be poet in residence, I want that position to make an impact. I want it to matter. And so we spent a semester just talking about what can we do. And the next semester we had our first spring literary festival, and we're having our 10th anniversary festival in this coming April. So we've been able to bring in probably by this point over 100 guest writers, and for a couple summers we did a young writers workshop. And just next week we're having a sort of open house for students interested in writing. And we're able to do some things that being poet in residence and having some of my job dedicated to what I really think of as like community building.
Mhm.
Like how does a writer thrive? How does a young writer thrive? How does a young writer connect with an older writer?
Well,
You need a community for it.
you definitely don't look like an older writer, so I'm not even sure why you're even saying that. But I love
Well,
the fact that you do care so much about our future with our young students. Jesse, thank you so much for taking the time with us today at Briar House Writes. Before we leave, tell us if you're currently working on a project and how can we find your work?
I have a website which is in bad need of update, but I do have a website for my writing and my editing projects. I've had a couple of things come out in the last 6 months that I would love to put on the screen here for a minute. This is a new edition of the Southern Poetry Anthology
Mm.
Contemporary Appalachia volume, a collection of Appalachian poets, pretty substantial that I was able to help bring together. And first edition came out 15 years ago. We were able to update and expand it by a little bit. I'm proud of this book because these are my ancestors here on the cover. These are my great and great grandparents. This is the hallway in the house where I grew up, and so this one is
Lovely.
very special to me. And also just came out this year. I'm a co-editor on the complete poems of James Agee, who is uh, one of the great Tennessee writers from Knoxville. I've called him my hometown literary hero. And so being able to work on that with one of my old professors, Michael LaFaro at the University of Tennessee, a project I started when I was in graduate school, and we just finished just able to bring it out this year. It's almost 700 pages, so it took
Wow,
it took quite an investment from both of us time wise. And
I
just
bet.
love being part of that, and love to be able to bring this side of James Agee's work out to people who may not be all that familiar with it.
And will it be available in libraries as well?
Mhm. Yeah, we've tried to make sure it's University of Tennessee Press published it, and they have a good connection with libraries in the state. It's a pretty hefty volume, so finding it in your library is a good way to get it. He's known for his novel, a Pulitzer Prize winning novel, A Death in the Family, and his brilliant work of nonfiction, Let Us Now Praise Famous Men. Kind of paved a new way for nonfiction writing, but his poetry is really fantastic too.
Yeah, I encourage everyone to look for that book. Well, I appreciate Jesse so much for you being here. Thank you
It's my
again.
pleasure. Thank you so much. I'm really grateful for it.